when Jesus comes back to redeem and judge the world, his judgment is going to be severe, it's going to be agonizing, and it's going to be heartbreaking, but it's not going to be in conflict with his character or what we know about his love. If anything, when Jesus comes back to judge the world, his judgment and his severe wrath is actually going to amplify, believe it or not, and magnify his character and everything we already know about his love. And before you object, I just want you to know that I know that most of us in the room don't actually think that is possible. Right? We don't think it is possible for a God, if there is one, to be both full of love and full of wrath at the same time. And I'm not a mind reader. I'm not going to pretend to be one this morning. But if I could take a wild guess, I'm willing to bet that for many of us in here, this idea of love and wrath, it's like oil and water. It's not compatible. And because we don't think it's compatible for someone to be full of wrath and full of love, the last place any of us really ever expect to find and discover a merciful, patient, loving God is in the midst of severe judgment and wrath. And yet, that is exactly what we're going to see in today's text. In Revelation 14 and in Revelation 15, we're going to see just how patient and merciful and loving the God of the Bible is in the midst of severe judgment and wrath. It's kind of like what happens when you're out driving in the country, you know, and it's late at night, it's really, really dark, and then you look up at the sky and whoa, right? You guys ever notice how the stars seem to shine brighter the darker the night? Right? You ever notice how the contrast between the sky and the stars increases dramatically the darker it is? It's wild, isn't it? The distant stars seem to shine the brightest in the darkest night. And I'm just throwing this out there. I know it's kind of crazy, you guys, but what if the same thing is true about the wrath and the judgment of God? What if it is actually contrary to what a lot of us think and believe and assume? What if it's actually in the midst of God's most severe judgment and wrath that his mercy, his patience, and his love shines the brightest? Enter Revelation chapter 14. For those of you who were not here last week, in Revelation chapter 14, we saw some pretty remarkable things happen. First of all, we see a God who is so compelled by love for a broken world that has rebelled against him that he felt the need to not just send one or two, but three messengers to let the world know that there is still time for them to escape the judgment that's coming. Revelation 14, if you have a Bible, you can turn there. It's going to be up in the screen. I'm not going to reread like the whole thing that we read last week, but I just want to highlight a couple things from our conversation. You can watch the whole thing on YouTube if you missed it. But God is going to send three angels, right, to let the world know what's happening. And so angel number one shows up, and this was his message: fear God, give him glory. Why? Because the hour of his judgment is coming. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Not that you guys need reminding, but in case you weren't here last week, we said, based on Colossians chapter 1, that tells us that from him and through him all things were created. We know that the him who he's talking about here, who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water, is who? Anybody know? Jesus. And so simply put, the message of the first angel, first messenger to the earth is simple: worship Jesus. We've talked about this all through this series. There are only two options. You're either going to worship the lamb or the dragon. The lamb is symbolic for Jesus. The dragon is symbolic for basically anything that's not Jesus. Those are the only two options. And everybody inevitably is going to worship something. You're going to, even if you're in the room today and you're like, I just strolled in here, I don't believe in God, Bible, church, or any of this stuff, you are going to give your allegiance ultimately to something. And so this first message comes and goes, hey, you should worship the one who made everything. Worship Jesus. And then God sent a second message. And his message was fallen. Fallen is Babylon the Great. Babylon in AD 96, when this letter was written, was code for Rome. Nobody ever thought Rome was going to fall. Everybody put their security in Rome. And so God, in his kindness and in his mercy, sends a messenger to let him know, like, knock, knock, knock. Hey, listen, I know it looks like it's going to last forever, but Rome is going to fall. Babylon is going to fall. Anything that you put your hope and security in other than the Lamb of God, which is Jesus, it will fall. And when it falls, if you're still hanging on to it, you will fall with it. But the reason God is sending this message is because he doesn't want people to fall with Babylon when he falls. And so he's telling them, worship Jesus. Babylon is going to fall. And then a third angel came, and this angel said in a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast. Again, your worship is what is at stake in this battle. Right? That's what the enemy wants. The enemy wants your loyalty, your allegiance, and your worship. And he knows that you're going to give it to something. You're either going to give it to Jesus or you're going to give it to him. And so this third angel comes and he's saying, hey, if you give your allegiance, your loyalty, your worship to the beast and his image, and if you receive his mark on your forehead and on your hand, we talked about this. This isn't some weird microchip thing that we have to be afraid of. This is a sign of allegiance. If you do that, the angel says, they too, everybody who decides to hitch their wagon to the red dragon, will drink. Some of you are looking at me like, I don't believe you're reading this verse again. Like, it was so uncomfortable when I read it last week, but here we are again. Will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. They, referring to the beast and the dragon and everyone who worships him and receives his mark, will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. And there will be no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast and his image, or for anyone who receives the mark of his name. I said this last week, I'll say it again. Even though this text is agonizing and it is tragic and it ought to break our hearts into a million pieces, there's no way around it. There's no way around the conversation about how severe the wrath and the judgment of God is going to be in the end times for the dragon, the beast, and everybody who choose to worship them. And the reason there's no way around it is because it's all over the text. You guys with me? All over. And I don't just mean it's all over Revelation chapter 14. I mean it's everywhere in Revelation. I was texting our teaching team about a week or so ago, and I was like, pray for me. I'm going to talk about God's wrath again, you know. And Hannah was like, again? She's like, I thought we already covered that. I'm like, yeah, tell me about it. You know, I thought we already covered it too. Right? And you guys can fact check this all you want when you get home if you don't believe me. But you cannot skirt around it. It's everywhere. In Revelation chapter 7, we see the severe judgment of God when the 7 seals are opened. We talked about that. In Revelation chapter 8, we see severe judgment when the 7 trumpets are blown. Fast forward to Revelation chapter 14, and we see the severe judgment of God. And yes, that's right, you guessed it. Revelation chapter 15, severe judgment. Revelation 16, more judgment. Revelation 17, more judgment. Revelation 18, some of you are like, I'm not coming back for this series. Like, how many weeks is that? Revelation 18, what do we see? We see more judgment. Listen, I'm just going to throw this out there so there's no elephant in the room, okay? I know that some of you are like, okay, can we, like, you're over it. You're like, can we please move on now to a conversation that's more pleasant and more palatable than the severe judgment of God? I understand that, but listen, I would be doing you and myself a big disservice if I don't pause to just remind us this morning that the reason we keep running into the same narrative about the severe wrath and judgment of God is not because God is like Sid from Toy Story. Anybody remember Sid from Toy Story? You guys remember the kid who just loved to torture toys and burn them in the sun? Full disclosure, I used to think that's why we see wrath all over the Bible. For real. I used to think, oh man, the reason God keeps reminding us over and over and over and over and over again in the Bible about his judgment is coming is because God, like Sid, he's just vindictive and he's just this punitive God that just loves to punish and torture us. But the more I read Revelation, I hope we all get to this place. The more I read the revelation of Jesus Christ, the more I discover that nothing could be further from the truth. Listen to me, nothing could be further from the truth that God is talking about judgment because he's punitive and he's vindictive. And we know that because one, the same God who keeps warning us of coming judgment sent his son to die for us so that we wouldn't be judged. That's a pretty big deal. The second reason that we know that God is not talking about judgment and wrath because he's vindictive or punitive is because, watch this, every time in Revelation that we hear about the judgment and the wrath of God, it is accompanied by an invitation from God to give us a way out of that judgment. And so when God talks about judgment, he's talking about it because he's trying to give you and I a way out. It's kind of like that app that some of you guys have that warns you, tells you to stop speeding because a cop is ahead. And anybody have that? I obviously don't because I'm a man of the cloth and I never break the law. I don't drive fast, except this morning when I was running a little bit late. But other than that, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? You know that app that tells you like, hey man, you might want to slow down or you're going to be pulled over. It's a little bit like what we see in Revelation. This is massive. The reason God keeps bringing up judgment and wrath is not because God's like, oh, yeah, I can't wait to get him. No, he's bringing it up because he's trying to warn you. He's bringing it up because he's actually trying to give you a way out of that judgment. And so we're sitting here going, man, why does he keep talking about it? And God's going, I keep talking about it because I don't want you to experience it. And so God sends 3 messengers to let the world know that the hour of judgment is coming, but there is a way out. Watch what happens next in the text. After the 3 angels come, John has another vision. Anybody want to guess what this one's also about? More judgment, right? Look at what he says in verse 14. John says, I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was like, a son of man. Right? We know that's Jesus, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And then he says, another angel came out of the temple and called out in a loud voice to him, to Jesus, who sits on the cloud. And the voice said, take your sickle and reap. Because if you have a Bible, I want you to kind of just note this next phrase. I'll tell you why in a little bit. The time to reap has come. Also note this part, for the harvest is ripe. And so the text says, so he who sitteth on the cloud, which we know is Jesus, swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Verse 17, another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar, called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, take your sharp sickle, gather the clusters of the grapes. I'll explain all this in a little bit, I promise. You guys are like, what in the world are we talking about sickles and grapes? I promise it'll make sense in a bit. From the earth's vine, because, also note this in your Bible, the grapes are ripe. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city. This is so graphic. And blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as a horse's bridle for a distance of 1,600 stadia. There is so much going on in here in John's vision of God's final judgment. And I don't know how else to really explain it except to just ask if anybody in the room, has anybody in the room spent significant time working on a farm? Anybody like you've done some good farm? Wow, nobody at the 8. Okay, we got one person, a couple people in here, kind of slow hands going up. This is not gonna probably make sense to the rest of the room, so I got to come up with something else. How about this? Anybody ever been to Gus Brothers? Here you go. How about him? Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Everyone's like slowly. We've all been to Gus Brothers, right? You know, you guys know the farm, up in Michigan. If you're watching online, maybe from out of town, you're like, what is Gus Brothers? It is one of really only 5 things that we have to do in Toledo. I don't know if you guys have figured it out yet, But anytime someone comes to visit me in Toledo, I'm like, bro, we got 5 things. That's it. That's all we got. You can go to the zoo. Right? Anybody love the zoo? Right? We love our zoo. Anybody like, let's go to the zoo. One of the best zoos in the country. You know, I've heard that a million times. You can go to the art museum, which is pretty fun, right? We're very proud of our art museum. You can go to Mr. Freeze, right? That's number 3 on the list. Here we go. You can go to QQ Kitchen and Gus Brothers, and that's basically it. You do those 5 things, and it's all downhill from there. There's nothing else to do. I know it may not be the perfect comp, but if you've at least been to Gus Brothers or you've ever been to any kind of farm, then I'm hoping that you have a framework for at least having a basic understanding of what's happening in the text. Because what the writer is doing here is that he's taking God's last and final judgment and he is comparing it to 2 kinds of harvest. Everybody knows what a harvest is, right? You've never been on a farm, but you know what a harvest is. He's like, God's judgment, when Jesus comes back, it's going to be like 2 harvests. The first harvest is going to be the one where God decides to gather all of the people who have remained faithful to Jesus, to himself, for all of eternity. So imagine a farmer going out in the harvest. Thank you. One person was excited about that. The rest of you are like, you got something more impressive than that? I'm not sure that I got anything else. It's going to go downhill from there. But that's the first harvest, is that there's going to come a time in history where God's going to be like, all right, it's time. I'm going to now go and I'm going to harvest all of my children, all of the people who have put their faith in Jesus, all of the people who have remained faithful to Jesus and held on to the word of their testimony. God is going to gather them in a harvest. That's the first vision that John sees in this text. The second vision, it's a little bit more tragic and agonizing. The second vision is a harvest that represents the moment in time where God is going to pour out his final complete wrath on the dragon, the beast, and unfortunately, everyone who's chosen to hitch their wagon to the red dragon. And the second harvest, best as I can tell, in context, is going to end with people being eternally separated from God. Again, I know the conversation is super duper, 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 duper uncomfortable for a lot of us, but you can't get around it in the text. And so John tells us earlier that people are going to be separated forever. And then now he has 2 visions. And in the second vision, he wants us to know that there is going to come a moment in history where there will be a separation. All of the people who are with the Lamb are going to be with the Lamb forever. And everyone else is going to face the same fate as the dragon and his beast. Now, having said that, I know that some of you are still wrestling with that tension. You're like, okay, like I get it, but it still feels a little bit uncomfortable. And if that is you, I beg you to not miss the part of John's vision where he tells us that the permission to harvest did not happen until, you guys remember what I told you to note? It was time to reap. And it didn't happen until the harvest was ripe. He tells us a little bit later, again, in the second one, that the grapes are ripe. Again, I know that most of us are like, what in the world does that mean? I believe the part of what the text is trying to show us in here is that God's judgment is never premature. The implication being, God's not going to come to judge the world until everybody, as many people as possible, have had a chance to opt out of the judgment that's coming. And so he's waiting. He's like, we're not going to harvest until it's harvest time, and we're not going to harvest until everything is ripe. Even in this text, if you will just pay attention, you will notice how it is dripping with the patience and the mercy and the love of a God who is withholding his judgment until as many people as possible have chosen the way out that he continues to offer them before his wrath comes. Matt Chandler is a pastor of a village church in Texas, and he said this phrase. I was listening to him that I thought was so good. He says, no one is under the wrath of God except those who choose to be. I'll say that again. Nobody, listen, this is huge, is under the wrath of God except those who choose to be. And how do we know that? We know because every time he warns us of his judgment and his wrath, he gives us a way out. We know because he sent his son to give us a way out. We know because he has moved mountains and done everything possible to give us a way out. And so if you are under the wrath of God, or if you remain under the wrath of God until Jesus comes back, it's because you choose to remain under the wrath of God, because you have a way out. It's interesting, isn't it, how a lot of us want to look at God and go, God, why do you insist on judging the world? And I just imagine God is looking back at us going, why do you insist on staying under the wrath and not taking my way out? God's like, I keep warning you, and I keep trying to give you a way out of the wrath. And so John has these two visions. And the second one, man, it's agonizing. But again, the reason he's having this vision is because God is trying to give us a way out of the coming judgment. And I know I'm leaving like a lot of meat on the bones here, but I got to move on, or we're going to be in this series till 2049. And I don't think Jeremy really wants that. So we're going to just keep reading. Can we keep reading? Is that okay with you guys? There's a lot in here. But we're going to go to chapter 15. Listen to what happens in chapter 15. And so the three messengers come. John has this vision of the harvest. And then in Revelation chapter 15, John tells us that he saw in heaven another great and marvelous sign. 7 angels with 7 last plagues. Last, because with them, God's wrath is completed. Quick little side note. I don't know if this is helpful for anyone, but if you're one of those people that you've always prayed for God to give you a sign, and you're like, God, just give me a sign in heaven, like of what you want me to do, because I'm confused, I'm stuck. Be careful what you ask for. I'm just telling you, be careful what you ask for, because 3 times in Revelation, John gets a sign from heaven. I don't think any of us would have liked any of them. The first sign in Revelation, I believe, chapter 12, is he saw a pregnant woman who was crying in labor as if she was about to have a baby. And you're like, that's not so bad. Well, the second sign he saw in heaven was a 7-headed red dragon who was waiting to devour the baby. The third sign John saw in Revelation is this sign, where he saw 7 angels with 7 plagues. And maybe it's just me, but I read this the other day, and I'm like, you know what? I think if I go my whole life without seeing a sign in heaven, I'm good. Like, I think anybody, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to ask for signs anymore. I'm like, I'm good, like I don't need a sign. If this is what it means, John is like, I saw a sign. 7 angels with 7 plagues. That sounds like a nightmare to me. But it's interesting, isn't it, that John said the sign that I saw was great and marvelous. Why in the world will John say that this sign of 7 angels with 7 last plagues is something that is great and marvelous? Can I tell you guys what I think? I think the reason, thank you, one person nodded their head. I think the reason that John thought this sign was great and marvelous is because John saw 7 angels with 7 last plagues, and he knew that meant that this was signaling the final completion of the wrath of God. Anybody remember what the number 7 signifies in the Bible, symbolizes, generally speaking? What does the number 7 mean? Anybody? Completion, right? Completion, perfection, right? And so God created the earth in 6 days. On the 7th day, he said he rested because it is what? Done. The work is done. I know this is different. I keep saying it from the way our Western minds think, but the number 7 in the Bible is symbolic for completion, and it is symbolic for perfection. And so what John is seeing here is he sees 7 angels with 7, and he even tells us last plagues, last because with them God's wrath is complete. And so John is going, man, this is great and this is marvelous, because it means that the wrath of God and the severe judgment of God is going to have an end. The wrath of God is going to have an expiration date. Okay, you ever go in your fridge or in your pantry and you take a little can or the jug of milk and you look at the date and you smell it and you're like, that's not good. John is signaling to us that the wrath of God and the judgment of God that we've been reading for a really long time is going to come to an end. It's not going to last for eternity. It's going to have an expiration date. And I'm going to tell you why this is really, 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 really good news for any of us who choose to put our faith in the Lamb. The completion of God's wrath and his judgment is going to signal the beginning of a new and forever life without death, evil and wickedness for those who remain faithful in Jesus. Note to self, only 3 people are going to say amen with me, and I'm going to just be doing the rest of the amen by myself. Or maybe some of you guys missed it. So I'm going to back the truck up, and I'm going to say it again. The reason this vision is great and marvelous to John with the 7s is because it signaled to him that this was going to be the end of God's judgment and his wrath. And John knew that the end of God's judgment and his wrath was going to signal the beginning of a new and forever life without death, wickedness, or evil for everybody who have put their faith in Jesus Christ. This is what awaits us. And I know it doesn't solve every tension in the room, but I just want to do something for just a moment, if it's okay with you guys. I want you guys to just pause for a moment, everybody in the room. And I want you to actually take the next few moments to imagine what that moment will be like. If this is true, if you don't believe the Bible is true, I get it. Different conversation for a different Sunday. But if what John is saying here is true, if there is going to come a time in the near future where God's wrath and God's judgment will complete and be finished, and it will start a life without evil or wickedness or death, I want you guys to imagine what the moment will be like when you realize for the first time ever that you never again have to experience the feeling of death or loneliness or fear or anxiety or shame or insecurity or doubt, envy, jealousy. Never again will you have to experience all of that when God's wrath and judgment is complete in defeating evil forever. Imagine that moment when you open your eyes and you realize that you finally get to rest in Eden. No evil, no wickedness, no death. And never again do you have to say goodbye to the people you love. John saw this vision, and it's like, it is good, and it is marvelous, because the wrath of God is coming to an end. It gets better. John goes on to say, and then I looked, and what I saw, he says, looked like a sea of glass, glowing with fire. And he says, standing beside the sea, this is amazing, those who had been victorious over the beast and his image and over the number of his name. I read this the other day, and I was like, oh man, this reminds me of that thing that the writers of Frozen did when they snuck in a little bit of a cameo that is so subtle. If you aren't paying attention, you will miss it. Any Frozen fans in the house? Anybody love Frozen? You love Frozen? You love Frozen? What's your favorite one? 1 or 2? Tell me why it's 1. 1, thank you. All right, who said 2? Somebody said 2 over here. Can we get the ushers to escort that young man out of the room? Can't come back, buddy. I'm kidding. I love you. I'm just joking. 2 is good. 1's better. All right. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, okay, we can argue afterwards. I'll meet you in the corner. All right. You're going to lose. I'm going to beat you down. I don't care that you're a kid. All right. I'm kidding. All right. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, everyone seen Frozen? Everybody seen the movie Frozen? Anybody? Let it go? Okay. All right. If you haven't seen Frozen, I don't know what to tell you. But there's this scene in the first Frozen movie when the gates are open, right? Is it Coronation Day? Is that what it is? I almost said Colonization Day. That's a different thing. That's Colonize Arendelle. All right. I was like, is it Coronation Day? Okay. All right. So there's this scene, right, when the colonizers are here. The gates are open, right? Oh, man. There's so many thoughts right now. I just got to get back. I want to run with it. I'm like, oh, there's so many jokes over there, but I'm gonna stay in my lane. Okay. So they open the gates, right? And anybody know where I'm going with this one? And there's a really brief cameo of Flynn Rider and Rapunzel. Anybody ever seen this? Look it up when you get home. It's like seconds. Like if you don't even know, you might miss it. I was watching actually last night. My kids were watching Frozen in the van because, parents, sometimes you just have to let the screen do the parenting for you. Amen? I'm like, all right, I've had enough of this. Y'all watch a movie. And in the middle of nowhere, my kids yell. Lola's like, there she is. There's Rapunzel. Right? It is short and it is brief. And if you're not paying attention, you will miss it the same way that if you're not paying attention, you will miss the kind of brief and subtle cameo that one of the most iconic scenes from the Old Testament just made in a vision that John saw in the future. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I promise you I'll show it to you in a little bit. But first, I want to just go back for a second to where we began this conversation, okay? And some of you, hopefully most of you, remember this. But we said when we started this series that Revelation is not just an apocalyptic letter. Anybody remember this image? We said Revelation is a what? It's a prophetic letter. Right? And I know that's kind of a big, some of you are like, what in the world, prophetic letter? That's a big theological church term. But the prophetic letter is simply a way of saying that in Revelation, God does something really unique in Revelation. Revelation is a prophetic letter means that in Revelation, God is going to declare things that cannot be known by human means about the past, the present, and the future. And he's going to do it in non-linear, non-consecutive order. I'm going to say that again. When we say Revelation is a prophetic letter, what we're saying is that in Revelation, God is going to declare things that no one can know about the future, the present, and then the past, and he's going to do it in non-consecutive order. Exhibit A, Revelation chapter 15. This is so cool to me. It's AD 96. John has a vision on the island of Patmos, and in his vision, he sees a future event where God's wrath is complete. And in that vision, you ready for it? You ready for your mind to be blown? I hope you guys think this is cool. I thought this was so cool when I first saw it. But in his vision, he sees everybody who has put their faith in Jesus, everybody who has remained faithful to Jesus, and he saw us doing something that the nation of Israel did way back in Exodus. Anybody, any Old Testament geeks in the room? Anybody seen Prince of Egypt? You remember that scene when they left Egypt and God rescued the entire nation from Pharaoh and the Egyptians, right? And they crossed the sea, crazy miracle. And now they are standing by the sea as their enemy has been conquered, and they are singing in victory. That's this scene, you guys. That's what John's vision is drawing from. John sees the people who have been faithful to Jesus, and just like the Israelites in Exodus who stood by the Red Sea as God gave them victory over their enemy, John sees us in the future standing not by a Red Sea, but by a sea of glass, and we are standing there over victory that the Lamb has given us over the dragon and his beast. And this might be my favorite part of the whole narrative. We're not just standing there like the children of Israel were standing by the Red Sea, but we are singing a song of victory about how great our God is, the same way that the children of Israel in the Exodus story stood by the Red Sea singing a song of victory about how great their God is. He defeated Pharaoh and he defeated Egypt, and John wants us to know that there's going to come a day when God's wrath and God's judgment is going to end in the ultimate defeat of the dragon, the beast, evil, and all wickedness. And when that happens, we're going to stand by a sea of glass, and we are going to sing together a song of victory in response to the God who overcame the beast and his image. John says, I saw what looked like a sea of glass glowing with fire, and standing beside the sea, that's you and I, that's anybody in the room who's given their faith to Jesus. He says, we're standing there victorious over the beast and its image. And then watch this. I don't know if you guys think this is cool. I think it's cool. He's saying, hey, when I saw you, you guys were holding harps given by God. And he says this, and then we sang the song of, if you thought I was like overstating the whole throwback to like Exodus, watch this. We were singing the song of God's servant, who? Moses, and of the Lamb. What's the song that we're going to be singing? Great and marvelous are your deeds, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, King of the nations. Who will not fear you, Lord, and bring glory to your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship you because your righteous acts have been revealed. Oh my God. Literally, this is insane. And maybe you guys already caught it, but it took me a minute. It took me a minute, you guys, to see the significance of John telling us that a day is coming where this is the song that we're gonna sing in the aftermath of seeing God's severe judgment and wrath being poured out on the world. Aftermath. John is saying, I know it makes you uncomfortable right now. I know you're not so sure what to think about this idea of wrath and severe judgment. But he's like, I saw a vision. And in the vision that I saw, in the aftermath of the completion of God's wrath, when God is done defeating evil and judging the world, the commentary out of your mouth is not going to be, man, that was not fair. Or, man, I don't know about that. That was a little too severe. No, John's like, the commentary, when that happens, is going to be, wow, great are your deeds. Just and true are your ways. That, John is saying, is the song that you and I are going to be singing. Another way to put it is that John is saying that after God is done with his judgment, after his wrath is complete. You know that thing that you and I do where we look at evil in the world and go, man, if there's a good God, why won't he do something about it? John is going, there's going to come a day where you're not going to need to ever feel that way before again. Why? Because he would have already done it. And you're going to, I know this is a hard sell, but you're going to look back at how God judged the world, and you're going to go, whoa, he was just, and he was true, and he is great. Any parents in here ever have to make, you don't have to raise your hand for this one, it's a tough one, but you ever have to make a decision for your children that you knew they couldn't understand, even if you tried your best to explain it to them? John's going, I know that you don't like the idea of the wrath and the judgment of God, but a day is coming where the same heart, you ready for this? The same heart that struggles to believe that a loving God can have wrath and judgment is going to burst out in song. That's what Revelation is saying. You're wrestling right now, but when God is done doing what God is going to do, your heart will burst out in song as you stand on a sea of glass, and you will sing about how great and marvelous are his deeds, Lord Almighty. Just and true are your ways. I promise you guys, when it's all said and done, nobody's going to be like, but what about this? But what about that person? But that wasn't fair. I thought this could have been this and this could have been that. No, when it is all done, we're all going to look at what God did, and we're going to look in the aftermath of his judgment and wrath and go, wow, you are exactly who you have claimed to be. His wrath and his judgment will amplify and magnify everything we've ever read about his character and his love for us. And we will be so compelled that our hearts will burst out in song. Great and marvelous are your deeds, Lord Almighty. Just and true are your ways. I love that John didn't just see us singing, but he saw everybody who was faithful to Jesus singing together in a sea of glass. I've shared this before, I think many times, but one of my favorite moments during my very brief stint at UT was going to the games in the glass bowl and standing in the student section. I had a fro back then, imagine that. And we would spray my fro like a helmet. It's pretty cool. And I would stand there with hundreds of other students, and we would sing. Anybody ever been in that moment? Can I show you? Found this in my basement last night. Can I show you what it looked like? Here's a picture that someone took of my friends and I at a UT game on a disposable camera, by the way. Some of you don't know what a disposable camera is, but ask your grandparents when you get home. Anybody remember back when you would take a picture in a disposable camera and you would take it to Meyer, and then you come back 3 days later to get it, and then half of them would be trash, and you're like, there's not even you're like, what, like, do I get a discount? And they're like, no. I'm like, this is a scam. You know, anybody know what I'm talking about, right? This picture, true story, was taken on a disposable camera, and there's me. I'm not flicking the camera off, by the way. Jeremy's like, it looks like you're, no, I'm going like this. Yeah, I think. I don't know what I'm doing. But it's not a middle finger, just to throw that out there. Maybe we can edit that out of the screen. But this is me and my friend Royce, and this is John, and this is Chris, and we are at the UT game, right? And we're excited, and we are singing a song of victory like we always do, because our enemy, the Bowling Green Falcons, have been defeated again, and they're walking off the field in defeat, and we are singing the fight song. Can you just pause for just a second? Anybody know the fight song? Because I don't know if I can sing it with the past. You of Toledo. Anybody? We'll fight for you. Nobody? You, where are my UT students? Toledo. We love thy golden blue. Let's go blue. Land of the varsity. The enemies must yield. We'll fight just like our ancestors and march right down the field. Nobody? Toledo. Yeah, give you a hand for the 3 people in the room who, right? Thank you. That was a perfect, seamless transition. Again, I've said this before. The only part I didn't like about this song was the part about how we'll fight like our ancestors. I'm like, I don't know that we have the same ancestors. I'm like, I was always like, can someone clarify what ancestors we're talking about here? This is kind of weird, but you know, right? But listen, if you've ever been in that scene, you know what I mean when I say very few moments beat that moment where you are standing with like-minded people on the same team, and you have just secured an unlikely victory, and you are singing the fight song triumphantly. I'm sure you guys already knew where I was going with this before I even got there, but the picture that the writer is painting here is that there's gonna come a day where you and I are gonna stand, imagine this, with everybody who have been rescued by the Lamb from every nation, tongue, tribe in the world, and we're all gonna stand by a sea of glass, and we together, in light of what the Lamb has accomplished, are gonna sing our victory song about how great and awesome our God is, because he not only defeated the dragon and the beast, but he defeated evil and wickedness, and he defeated death. I know a lot of you guys have heard this before, but what a day that'll be, church. What a day it'll be to stand with brothers and sisters from all over the world and sing about a great and marvelous God who is just and true. What a day it'll be when shouts of praise will ring from one corner of the earth to another corner of the earth, because finally it is on earth as it is in heaven. What a day it'll be when we know that we no longer have to say goodbye to our loved ones. We no longer have to face death. We no longer have to face sickness. What a day it will be when we know what John experienced in Revelation chapter 1. What a day it'll be, you guys. We read this last week, when you and I will fall on our feet like John fell at his feet in Revelation 1, because we're gonna see him who John says the hair on his head was white as snow.
His eyes were like blazing fire. What a day it'll be when we see the one whose face is going to shine like the sun in all its brilliance. What a day it will be, you guys, when we look, Revelation chapter 1, and we see him coming through the clouds. Him, the Alpha and the Omega, who was, and who is to come, the Almighty God. What a day it will be when we sing a song of victory to Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn from among the dead, the ruler of the kings of the earth. What a day it will be when we break out in victory song, lifting up him who loved us and has freed us from our sins by his blood and has made us into a kingdom and priests to serve his God and Father. What a day it will be when every knee bows and every tongue confesses that Jesus is Lord, and we all declare that to him and him alone be glory and power forever and ever and ever. What a day when we join with the 100 million angels in Revelation 4 in worship of Jesus, the Lamb that saved us and rescued us and redeemed us.